So for those individuals who choose to get married, there's been lots and lots of research on how happy that couple is over time or how satisfied they are in that relationship over time. And based on a lot of that research, it doesn't always look good. I mean, that said, as somebody who's married, would recommend it, but obviously each relationship is different. Based on these studies, though, over 40 years that we've been studying these kinds of topics, and prior to those 40 years, we were still thinking about these topics. One of the main pathways in marriage is basically the down, down, down pathway. Essentially, marital satisfaction is peaking during the honeymoon. And what we see is that the steepest decline is during the first few years of marriage. We used to say that there's like the 7 year itch, this idea that if you make it to 7 years, then you're probably pretty good to go. But now the research is showing this is more like a 4 year thing. So if you make it past 4 years of marriage, then you're past the divorce danger zone. It gets a little bit complicated, but at least for first marriages. And why is this happening? Why is there a decline? Why is it down, down, down in marital satisfaction? There are lots of reasons. One, it could be work related things. So if work is challenging or causing stress, if you're in careers that you don't like and can't really get out of it because you do have a family and children, this may have been more of a problem in times past when people stayed in careers more than they do today. Another reason could be because of children. Children are stressful, and we'll talk more about that when we get to motherhood and fatherhood in just a few slides. It could be financial reasons. We do know that financial reasons are a cause of lots of different divorces, and part of that is because of just that stress. So broadly, stress. But the biggest factor seems to be just time, time itself. So is this, changing one's identity or figuring out what you like, what you don't like, what you can put up with, what you can't put up with in a potential partner or in with your partner. And so there are many different reasons why we see the down, down, down as a common marital pathway. A more positive pathway is a U-shaped curve. So essentially, yes, it's dipping in the same way that that down, down, down pathway is describing. But eventually, once maybe work is no longer a big stressor, or children are grown and no longer a big stressor, or for those individuals who are coming from wealthier backgrounds and or at least stable backgrounds, then eventually they're going to retire, and then they report being happier at this empty nest stage. So it comes back up, marital satisfaction. And it doesn't have to be just at retirement, but as those things are happening, it's moving in an upward direction. Does this overall seem negative to you? Probably many of you, yeah, you're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound very good." But, even if marital satisfaction isn't as high as it was during the honeymoon, that doesn't mean that it's bad marital satisfaction or dissatisfaction. It just means less satisfaction. And every relationship is different. When we talk about well-being or happiness or satisfaction within marriages, and obviously even broader than that, communication is playing a big, huge role. So even during times of stress, those partners who are communicating well are those partners who are going to get through those difficult points better than those individuals who aren't communicating. So what does some of the research say about these topics? And before I get into that, this is again, not an exhaustive list of all of the different topics that have to do with communication and relationship satisfaction. I highly encourage you to take the COM class, Social Relationships. I think it's COM 210, because it's going to talk a lot more about these topics that I'm covering today. And indeed, in the COM class, they are using a lot of psychological findings. So based on some of the research, these are some take-home points, but not exhaustive. First, happy couples report a high ratio of positive to negative comments. This means that, and what the research shows, is that for every 5 positive comments, you're having no more than 1 negative comment. So the research has shown that if you have a smaller ratio than that, so let's say 5 to 4, 5 to 3, or 5 to 2, then it raises one's risk for divorce. So what this looks like in day-to-day life is complimenting more than criticizing, of saying things like I'm grateful for you, or I'm glad that you helped me out in this way, or just overall, like calling somebody a pet name compared to negative comments. So high ratio of positive to negative has been shown to lessen the rates of divorce, risk of divorce. Happy couples also report that they're less likely to get personal when there are disagreements or arguments or times of stress. So, for example, instead of saying somebody is like, "Oh my gosh, you're so gross," they're phrasing it in a way. One, using I statements is always very beneficial. But like, "I don't like when I come home and the house is messy." This feels different than being directly attacked. Again, if your partner was rolling eyes or looking disgusted, or using words that are like, "You're just disgusting." And so it's not personal, it's more phrasing it about me or you as an individual. And then also, talking about the situation and not necessarily as the specific person. So those are both examples of ways in which we're communicating positively, but there's also this important part about knowing when to communicate. So not just what to communicate, but when. So happy couples report that they are more sensitive to their partner's need for space. And everybody is different in this way, how much space we actually need, or if we're ready to talk about issues or not ready to talk about issues. But there are some people who are demanders, who always want attention, emotional attention. "Hey, please, sit by me, talk with me. I need this right now." And there are people who are withdrawers, or who are withdrawing from a situation. And in both of those situations, this is not ideal. It's not to say that you have to be always, just with it and wanting to talk to your partner. But like a good combination of there are times where maybe I need my space, but other times where I want to give you, all that you need, and other times where it's time to connect as couples. But for individuals who are particularly high in demanding or withdrawing behaviors, this is not going to lead to optimal happiness or satisfaction within that relationship. And so sometimes if those communication needs aren't matched, or if you have somebody who is asking too much or too little of you, then this might lead to divorce. Let's talk about that next. The rates of divorce have changed over time. They've kind of leveled out in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years even. But roughly we see 40 to 50% rates of divorce, depending on the sample that you're looking at. Those numbers are going to get even higher if you're looking at second, third, fourth marriages, because the research shows that if you get divorced once, more likely to get divorced for a second time, and so on. But roughly, we're looking at about half of marriages are ending in divorce. The main reasons that divorce is typically reported, it comes down to communication problems or lack of attachment, so just not feeling in love or as connected to the person as you once were, and stress. And obviously communication problems and lack of attachment could also be sources of stress. A lot of people assume that divorces occur because of extramarital affairs, but what research actually shows, and this is a national study of US marriages, is that an affair only happened after, the relationship had already gone sour. And so like it's not coming first. We're not having an affair that's causing problems within the marriage. So 2 out of 3 people reported that the affair that they had around the time of the relationship was dissolving, and so 2 out of 3 are reporting that, but they were already unhappy before that took place. In the Kuthar textbook, you read about divorce and how it affects children and adolescents broadly. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about how it affects the married people themselves or the adults in the relationship, both in terms of consequences and benefits. This obviously is not a one size fits all model because everybody is different and their reasons for divorce are different and the outcomes are different. In general, the consequences are that one or both partners need to move. Perhaps they need to get a better job because prior to the divorce, they had a two-income household. And after the divorce, then, a one-person household is harder to maintain. There may be legal hassles that aren't just at the time of divorce, but continue on for periods well after the divorce. I think of a family member that I have who has to repeatedly go to court about his children and also to figure out alimony issues. So those legal hassles can go on for quite some time. This also can lead parents to feel really anxious about how their children are faring. This is quite a common occurrence with divorce that parents are really, really concerned about what happens with those children. And if you recall back to the readings from Kuther, the research by and large shows that children from divorced parents fare just as well as children who don't have divorced parents unless there are underlying issues. So typically it's the case that there might be some short-term problems with children in terms of feeling anxious or other mental health issues, acting out, but usually they return back to a more healthy, optimal level of behaviors. In terms of benefits, some people report that after divorce, they experience a lot of emotional growth. They might feel more independent, like I can make it on my own. Perhaps it was a terrible marriage where, people were emotionally abusing each other. And this way, it could be a real sense of relief. So there definitely are some benefits that can emerge out of this. Now, in terms of the question of like who feels the best or better, more optimally after divorce, for people who believed that their marriage was always miserable, like always negative, like they can't really remember a good time, maybe right in the beginning, but shortly after that it went downhill. After they go through the divorce process, they do report feeling considerably better. However, for some people, they, might think about times where they were previously happy. And if they're recalling these times after they got divorced, but like, well, there were good times with my, spouse, then sometimes that leads them to question whether divorce was the right action for them. And they could experience some declines in well-being. Emotions are complicated and marriages are complicated. So, you can expect that some emotions are going to change over time and in different directions. But the research is, in general, is looking at, how do people go through this process of divorce, and do they come out in more optimal ways, like in terms of outcomes, or are there some consequences? It's going to vary so substantially from person to person, and this is just a broad overview.